Hi, tutors. Let's talk about deepening questions. So, in our flow of tutoring session, uh, after we've connected and oriented, we're kind of going through the process. And the first part of the process is where are we? And that's where we're trying to figure out where the student is, where their knowledge is, and where we have to work from, right? So, one of the tools we can use to figure out where are we is deepening questions. This is a way of probing kind of the limits of what a student knows and how, as far as content, but also as far as process. And so I'm going to give you some non-examples and examples, and then I'm going to take you through a fabulous Khan Academy page for you all to kind of get your feet on the ground in a real example. So we're about to look at a Khan Academy line graph in a second here. But this is kind of the goal of what we want to try to do is we want to try to shift from this first column and try to practice deepening questions, things that are more in the right column. Because it's tempting to just kind of jump into things, and it's tempting to kind of to take over early. And the goal is for us to kind of take a step back and to kind of think of how could I expand the students' engagement and participation in the process of tackling this question. So it might be tempting to say, okay, so we're trying to find how long it took to land the plane. Got it. Because to you, you're able to look at an example problem and figure out what it's asking. But that's a process skill that you could teach the student or have the student kind of shoulder the burden of. So instead, a deepening question you could ask is, what is the question asking for here? Then they have to dig for it. And these other ones are good examples. Let me see. That's not really the best way to think about this kind of problem. Let's talk about that one. It's easy to kind of see how they're processing through a problem and to say like, that's going to lead them down a trail that it just doesn't help. But you're missing out on an opportunity to maybe mine what they're thinking about, what they're noticing. And so instead of labeling something, you could ask a deepening question like, what do you mean by it goes down? What is going down? Kind of asking more questions, getting them to explain more, getting them to say more words, because they might be noticing things that, or they might be summarizing things in a way that that you don't really pick up on what they're noticing, but they actually are noticing some important things that might actually help scaffold and build their understanding of the next thing. So what do you mean by ... Another great one is tell me more. So if they start explaining something and you're thinking, okay, they're onto something, or maybe they have a misconception. Sometimes it's just good to say, tell me more. And just see what they have to say, because sometimes they might have more insight if you give them the opportunity to show so. And then another great one is the what would happen if. So if you're looking at a complicated example, maybe break it into a smaller example or a simpler example and ask the question, what would happen if this was the scenario? Because that can kind of orient them to the type of question without the complexity of the question. So without further ado, let's tackle this Khan Academy question. Now, this is Khan Academy. For a lot of topics, they have all of their videos and such, but then they also have some practice. And the thing that I think is brilliant about Khan Academy's practice problems is that if you scroll to the bottom, there's this little button. And if you click the button, it actually allows you to draw on the question. So I'm going to grab my teal colored drawing tool here, and Andrew. Yeah, so I have a touch screen. That's kind of an unfair advantage. Maybe your computer isn't a touch screen. But even with the keyboard, I can still draw on here reasonably, right? Okay, then you erase with that. So let's take a look at this example. Wilbur landed his plane. The plane's elevation relative to the ground in meters as a function of time in seconds is graphed. Okay, and the question, how fast did the plane descend? Okay, so here you as a tutor might be like, okay, so we're trying to figure out how like the plane was going down in elevation, blah, blah, blah. But it's your opportunity to ask a deepening question, right? What is the question asking for? And you could wait here and say, I'm going to grab my tool here to circle it, but I want you to kind of look at the example and tell me. So you wait for a bit. The student says, the question is asking how fast. Awesome, how fast? So I'm going to circle that. That's the thing we're trying to find, right? And then you say, okay, what are our options? And they'll say 6 meters per second, 5, 4, 7. Okay. And then you get back to the graph. You say, what do you notice about this graph? I say, well, it looks like on the left, we got meters. Yeah, great. That's our y-axis. Awesome. On the bottom there, we've got time. Okay, great. So you're kind of orienting yourself to the graph and to what's being measured. And then you'll say, where does it show you like how fast it's going? Because I've got meters and I've got seconds. How do you know how fast something's going? They might say, I don't know. I don't see it anywhere. And then you can say, okay, fabulous. Let's look at how do you measure how fast something is? Like when you're driving in a car, like how do you measure how fast something is? That could be like an orienting question, right? Like what would happen if I asked you how fast your car was going? It'd say, oh, it's going 20 miles an hour. And you could say, okay, miles an hour. So, well, let me try using my touch screen here. Miles per hour. So in your response, you are saying a distance per time, right? So in this example, what is our distance and what is our time? And so that can help kind of expand your ability to get them involved in this question. So they're looking, oh, okay, so it's meters and it's seconds, so meters per second. They might not initially know like, oh, this question is asking for slope. But before you say this question is asking for slope, you want to ask as many deepening questions as you can. So another thing you could say is, okay, so at time 400, what is the elevation of the plane? So this is breaking into smaller pieces. Seeing if they have the prior knowledge of being able to kind of take a question like that and go, okay, 400 ... Oh, okay. Looks like 6,500. The other tricky thing there is that's in between two of the increments, right? So that might be an additional thing that they need to learn or be able to do, right? Between 6,000 and 7,000. We can say, okay, now what about at 800 seconds? Then they go ... Well, it's at 4,500. And so you can say, well, what's the difference between those elevations? Like how much elevation did the plane descend between those two times? Oh, I guess it looks like 2,000, right? And you can, as you're talking through things, you can kind of put their noticings on here. All right, so 2,000. Those of you that have to do keyboard totally get why this looks so wonky. Hopefully you're on an iPad. So 2,000 meters. I'll add my unit because that's the right thing to do. And then you can say, okay, so how long did it take that plane to get 2,000 meters? And say, I don't know. It's like, okay, well, we at this point, how many seconds had it been? 400. Okay, at this point, how many seconds had it been? 800. So how much time had passed between those two time points. So then they can start to intuitively maybe say like, oh, well, it's been 400. They might have that math skill to be able to just do it. Or they might not. You can say, okay, I want to show you a tool here, and you could do the difference between the two and show them that tool, or you could say each of these tick marks is 100, right? 100, 200, 300, 400. So here it's 100, 200, 300, 400. It spends 400 seconds. You can break it into the foundational concepts of just the axis, or you can do the difference by numbers, depending on what you want to try to get them involved in. But if you do it the first time, you got to make them do it the second time so that they get the marker on the page, right? So I hope that gives you kind of a context that you can think about questions to ask, ways to orient them to the problem, and ways to kind of expand their engagement in looking at things like this. Cool thing about Khan Academy, you got this ability to draw on things, and then, I don't know, 2,000 meters in 400 seconds. That sounds like 5 meters per second to me. Gives you a beautiful little sound, makes you feel awesome about yourself. So use Khan Academy as a resource, and use your deepening questions. Things like, what is the question asking you for? What ideas do you have to get X by itself? What do you see on the graph? What do you notice? What do you think it means, or what do you mean by it goes down? Tell me more. What would happen if? These are great ways to kind of open up the conversation instead of closing it down and you doing the work, right? This is a long example. Thanks for sticking with me through it. But I know that examples are kind of the best way to really get your hands dirty, trying to think through the scenarios that you actually are going to face. All right, take care. Okay, so your action step. Take a screenshot of this page of Deepening Questions. That way, when you're tutoring, you can look at it, take a deep breath, think, is there an opportunity for any of these type of questions? Instead of you saving the day, right? Try to get the student involved as much as possible. Good luck.